Welcome to week 3 of United States History 2, the rusted old order and a polished new world order, World War I in the 1920s. First of all, we begin with Henry Ford. Henry Ford was an electrical engineer with Detroit Edison Electric. With other investors, he opened Ford Motor Company in 1903, and there he introduced the very innovative Model T Ford. It was a 4-cylinder car, available only in black, and it cost $850 in 1908. Ford went ahead and studied meatpacking plants and how they moved animal carcasses from point to point on overhead hooks. Using that same principle, in 1913, he introduced a moving assembly line. By 1914, he had sold almost 250,000 Model T cars every year. In 1914, by the way, it took 93 minutes to assemble a car, just 10% of the time it had taken a year before, less than a year before. By 1925, 11 years later, he was turning out more than 9,000 cars a day, or one approximately every 10 seconds. And the price of the Model T had gone down from its 1908 price of $850 to below $300. Now, this assembly line work was so boring that there was a high turnover. So in 1914, to get more workers, he increased wages to $5 per day, which was about $2 more per day than the prevailing wages at the time. Other trendsetters, other innovators, were Wilbur and Orville Wright, two brothers of Dayton, Ohio. This shows their home in Dayton, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. They were bicycle manufacturers, and they decided to become interested in air flight. They made the first manned, heavier-than-air flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. And by 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew from Long Island, New York, in his single-engine Spirit of St. Louis. It was the first solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. It took 33 hours. Charles Lindbergh was handsome. He did not smoke or drink. He became a very popular figure of his day, being called Lucky Lindy. What about our neighbors to the south at this time period? Let's turn for a minute to Mexico. There, Porfirio Diaz had been president of Mexico for 37 years, but he was overthrown in 1911. Francisco Madero, in 1911, became president of Mexico. He was a liberal reformer, and the landowners, the church, and the army overthrew him in turn in 1913 in a coup by Victoriano Huerta. Madero was imprisoned and murdered, and President Woodrow Wilson of the United States called Huerta a butcher. He refused to recognize Huerta. When Wilson discovered that a German ship was unloading weapons at Veracruz in Mexico, he sent in the American Marines, who took the city. We were on the verge of war with Mexico, but other South American nations mediated the crisis. In 1914, rebellion forced Huerta to resign. Wilson recognized the new government, Venustiano Carranza. Now, Carranza was not without his opposition, and so Francisco, better known as Pancho Villa, opposed Carranza and raided American border towns. Because American border towns were being raided, President Wilson sent Major General John Blackjack Pershing to the border, who led 12,000 troops into Mexico to try to capture Villa. Pancho Villa successfully eluded him. World War I was starting, and Wilson called Pershing home because Pershing would become head of the American forces in World War I. World War I has been called the Great War, 1914 through 1918. First of all, some basic background information. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, Germany demanded a sizable war indemnity and seized Alsace-Lorraine from France. So there was already struggle going on between Germany, the bigger part of Germany was called Prussia at the time, and France in the late 19th century. There was other warfare around Europe. For instance, a war called the Russo-Turkish War between, of course, Russia and Turkey, ended by the Congress of Berlin in 1878. And there, the Ottoman Empire, which was Turkey, lost. It lost possessions in the Balkan Peninsula to other powers. And at that time, other powers like Austria-Hungary, just south of Germany, received administrative control over two former Ottoman Empire Turkish territories called Bosnia and Herzegovina, both of which contained many Serbs. Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania at the time won their independence. Now, there were a whole series of entangling alliances of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which we won't go into detail because they're absolutely dizzying. But the idea of it was if one power attacked another, another power would come in support of power A, and then somebody, and all of these entangling alliances would actually play out and help to start out the World War I or the Great War. Now, 1908, Austria-Hungary, that had taken over the area of Bosnia and Herzegovina as an administrative territory, actually took a further step. Fearing Serbian nationalism and possible Serbian expansionism, Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, making it a very formal arrangement. Now, some general information that you need to know to understand the different sides of World War I. The first piece of information is to understand the Habsburgs or the Habsburg dynasty. They ruled over Austria, Hungary, and over Bosnia and Herzegovina and lots of other places. And one of the things that's going to lead to the war is that the Austrian emperor's nephew and heir, Archduke Francis Ferdinand, along with his wife Sophia, were assassinated in the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia by a Serbian nationalist connected to an organization called the Black Hand. And this led Austria to issue an ultimatum to Serbia, saying that you must allow us to come into your country and literally conduct an investigation, or else there will be war. And of course, Serbia did not agree to those terms, and war would end up resolving. When it did result, it pitted the Central Powers. I always tell students a mnemonic to remember the Central Powers, a memory device is GATB, G-A-T-B, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria, against the allies of Great Britain, France, Russia, Romania, and for a time Italy, Japan, and later the US, plus many more. The Great War was truly a world war, with fighting in Europe, China, the Pacific Islands, the German colonies in Africa, and also in the North and South Atlantic. The course of the war not easily, but rather sadly, already by September 1914, had really emerged into trench warfare by the time of the First Battle of the Marne, literally where troops on the Central Powers side and on the Allied side were fighting one another, dug into horrible trenches, firing artillery back and forth at one another, and things seemingly were not going well. The U.S. declared its neutrality under President Wilson. Wilson did not like it when Britain announced a naval blockade of Germany. Germany retaliated with a submarine blockade of Britain and Germany sent its U-boats, Unterseebooten, undersea boats, its submarines, out into the Atlantic. In May of 1915, the British passenger liner Lusitania, and it was a passenger liner. However, you should know that it was also secretly carrying some ammunition. And a German submarine or U-boat torpedoed it. About 1,200 of the 1,257 people aboard died, including 128 Americans. Wilson sent notes complaining to Germany. Fearing that the U.S. would enter the war, Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan resigned. Germany backed down for the time being, agreeing not to torpedo passenger liners. In the election of 1916, Wilson was reelected mainly on the slogan of, "He kept us out of war." But of course, that would not last for long. In February of 1917, Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare. So, that meant that there would be simply no restrictions. Anybody was a target. Right at this time, too, Arthur Zimmermann, a German foreign secretary, to the German minister in Mexico, sent a telegraph. In the telegraph, it said, between Zimmermann and Mexico, that if war broke out between the U.S. and Germany, then Mexico should declare war against the U.S., and Germany would support the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona to Mexico after World War I. Now, relations, because we just reviewed this, between Mexico and the United States were not the best before World War I. This was a very frightening thing to Roosevelt and to others. But other events would be occurring in Russia, in Russia, that would kind of also turn events. In March of 1917, there was a revolution in Russia. And so things were very unstable there. By April of 1917, mainly due to this unrestricted submarine warfare in the Zimmermann telegraph, the U.S. Congress declared war against the Central Powers. In December of 1917, Russia signed an armistice with Germany. And in the March of 1918, at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Russia yielded Poland, the Baltic states, and the Ukraine to Germany. They were literally giving up territory to Germany. It took the U.S., of course, a while to get its army engaged. Number one, they needed to put together a conscription of men, and they needed to train the men. We needed to turn to a wartime economy and make munitions and ships. train the men, get the men across the Atlantic, etc. And so the German lines are finally breached in August of 1917. And the Kaiser, the Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany, abdicated on November 9th. A German Republic was proclaimed. And on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, on Armistice Day, the war ended. What were the results of the war? Estimates of between 10 and 13 million died, and some 20 million were wounded. 112,000 U.S. soldiers died. 4 long-lasting and old empires ended. The German Empire of Prussia, Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire because of all of the revolutions, the March Revolution, the later October Revolution. There was a communist overthrow in Russia, and that was also during the war. New European nations were created as independent nations in a response to the nationalist sentiments of people who lived in those nations. I have a little mnemonic for you. Obviously, you know, this is an American history class, so you just need to know that a lot of those Eastern European nations were created or recreated. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, because they would become very important after World War II as the Soviet Union would run over all of them and take them over. The peace negotiations at Versailles in 1919, many historians have written about these, and certainly there were good intentions on the part of many people, especially Woodrow Wilson, but sometimes good intentions don't always lead down a path of success. The war guilt and war reparations laid upon Germany were seen as one of the large mistakes at Versailles, and we'll see, would later on help lead to World War II. The League of Nations was created in a response to all of those entangling alliances of the 19th and early 20th century that had really helped lead to the war in the first place. Instead, the League of Nations was really a precursor of what we now know as the United Nations. And so instead of entangling alliances, it was a collective security arrangement. So instead of all these secret treaties and entangling alliances, it was a collective security arrangement. Unfortunately, as we'll see here, the United States never joined it, although Wilson, this was his big idea of the League of Nations. The territory of Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France. We're not going to have you worry about the Saar Basin. The Rhineland of Germany was to be occupied by Allied forces for 15 years, and a 30-mile wide strip along the east bank of the Rhine River was to be demilitarized. This is going to become very important because when World War II will be springing up, the remilitarization of the Rhine River will be a major cause of concern. Germany was to limit its army to 100,000 men. Its navy was to be limited and was not to have any military aircraft, tanks, submarines, or poison gas. There were other separate peace negotiations that were involving Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. Austria-Hungary was broken up into 2 separate nations, Austria and Hungary. Austria was forbidden to form a union with Germany. Please note this, because the Anschluss that later on takes place between Germany and Austria before World War II is one of the other problematic things. The League of Nations was given mandates, that is, mandated territories of the old Ottoman Empire to Great Britain and France. Great Britain was given mandates over Iraq and Palestine, and France over Lebanon and Syria. The breakup of the Ottoman Empire and these territories in the Middle East given mandates, which literally meant that Great Britain and France were to prepare these territories for eventual independence and, of course, democracy. This Middle Eastern area would become problematic, and it remains problematic today. Wilson was also known for his 14 points that included such basic categories as free trade, no more secret treaties, a reduction of armaments, self-determination for former colonies and for European peoples. At Versailles Palace in Paris, David Lloyd George of Britain, Clemenceau of France, Vittorio Orlando of Italy thought that Wilson was rather naive. Clemenceau stated that God himself was content with 10 commandments, while Wilson won at 14 points. Clemenceau and others won at war guilt for Germany. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., there were many isolationists in the United States Senate who did not want to approve the treaty. So Wilson took his case to the American people on a grueling national tour. In September, he suffered a stroke. And essentially his wife was really working behind the scenes during that time period. The U.S. Congress did not pass the treaty. And so this shows areas lost by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, lost by Russia, lost by Germany, lost by Bulgaria, and a demilitarized zone, which will kind of set you up for the rest of our dealings of the United States in World War II and in the Cold War for what happens. Now, the war at home included conscription, that is the draft. The Selective Service Act of 1917, 2.8 million were inducted by the draft, and another 2 million volunteered for the military. A War Industries Board was headed by Bernard Barak. It oversaw industrial production for the war effort to coordinate literally industries for the war effort. There was a National War Labor Policies Board, which was designed to increase production. The government, obviously, during war couldn't afford any strikes, so the National War Labor Policies Board enacted the 8-hour day, a living minimum wage, and collective bargaining rights in some industries. Now, this was for the duration of the war, so a lot of the industries reneged these policies after the war. Collective bargaining meant that a union, a collective, right, a union on behalf of its members could negotiate things like wages and working conditions with an employer. So certain expectations are enhanced during the war with things like collective bargaining. Also, thousands of women nationwide worked in defense plants. And then women's suffrage took a great leap forward because Wilson thought that the 19th Amendment would be important to the war effort. It passed in 1919 through Congress, and by August of 1920 was ratified by 2/3 of the state in the United States and became law. Prohibition. Some felt that the grain could be better used to feed the troop overseas than to make alcoholic production. So at this time, the 18th Amendment was passed. We know that there was a great anti-German hysteria, especially in very German cities like Cincinnati and Covington and Newport and other such places. Many Germans anglicized their name, or some Germans, not many. Libraries burned German books. Schools stopped teaching the German language. Cities changed German street names. Banks and businesses changed their names. Sauerkraut became known for a while as Liberty cabbage, and some people were imprisoned, and not for sometimes very solid reasons. Veterans came home from the war, and as oftentimes happens after a war, inflation occurred and unemployment rose. Post-war consumer spending drove up prices and hence the inflation. Businesses turned their backs against the 8-hour workday and some of the other reforms brought about by the National War Labor Policies Board. And in 1919, there were 3,600 strikes alone involving 4 million workers, including a very bad steel strike in 1919 when state and federal troops were called in to crush the steel strikers. There was also, because of the revolutions in Russia, a fear of communism. There was a Red Scare. Red because it was the color of the Bolshevik, the communist flag in the Soviet Union. The federal government deported some alleged subversives. Vigilante groups killed others. Libraries removed socialist books from their shelves. Teachers suspected of being socialists were fired. Excuse me. There was a great migration during World War I. Immigration fell, although immigration from Europe fell from more than 1 million a year to only 31,000 in 1918. Northern factories needed workers, and labor recruiters set themselves up in the South. Between 1915 and 1920, 500,000 blacks left from the South for the North in what is called the Great Migration. In places like Detroit, they worked in auto factories, and they in turn influenced in family to follow in a kind of a chain migration. By 1940, more than 1 million blacks from the South had migrated to the North. They settled in neighborhoods like Harlem and New York City and on the south side of Chicago. New York City's black population alone increased 115%, from 152,000 to 327,000 in the 1920s. And along with this migration came a new renaissance, a new pride in being black, a pride in black history and art and culture. The New Negro, as it was called, or also the Harlem Renaissance. Exemplified, for instance, by the black poet Langston Hughes, and also by places like the Cotton Club, a jazz club in Harlem in New York City, which attracted many white patrons as well. This would become the Roaring Twenties, so called because of the free spirit of the time. People across the nation pursuing mass culture and consumption culture, the influence of Hollywood and its movies. Young women who wore their hair short, wore short skirts, lipstick, rouge, even bared their arms and danced all night to wild jazz were called flappers. And it was the period of prohibition. So if you wanted to drink illegal liquor, you had to go to speakeasies and places that were literally operating underground, that is, beneath the law. And this is where America becomes, and its liquor trade becomes, and many of the other habits become controlled by the mafia. And this is the era of gangsters. This is also the era of nativism, that is, of anti-immigrants. And that's not really surprising because they just fought a war in Europe and people were very concerned about immigrants and what kinds of ideas they would be bringing to the United States. Would there be socialist ideas? Would they understand what democracy is really about, etc., etc.? So in 1924, the U.S. Congress passed the Johnson-Reed Act, which established immigration quotas, further limiting immigration by nation to 2% of the total in 1890. This was especially limiting to Southern Europeans and others who were considered less desirable. This was the era of the Ku Klux Klan. This is the second round of the Ku Klux Klan. It revived around 1915. It stood steadfast against blacks, immigrants, radicals, feminists, Catholics, and Jews. This was also the era where some people were reacting against the new science of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and became expressed and exemplified in the Scopes trial of 1925. John Scopes was a graduate of the University of Kentucky, and he was teaching evolution in a school in Dayton, Tennessee, which had banned the teaching of evolution. Clarence Darrow volunteered to represent Scopes. On the prosecution side was William Jennings Bryan. Bryan did not believe in evolution. The writer H.L. Mencken called it a monkey trial, and that's where it got its popular name. It literally became a media circus. In the end, Scopes was fined $100 and still never really solved a great deal of anything, and the debate continues. In the election of 1920, Warren Harding, a Republican, won an outstanding 60.5% of the popular vote. Some scandal would emerge in Warren Harding's administration. It occurred at Teapot Dome in Wyoming, which was federal land. Harding's Interior Secretary, Albert Fall, accepted bribes for leasing the drilling of oil at Teapot Dome, and Fall would be convicted. In 1923, Harding had a heart attack and died, and Vice President Calvin Coolidge became president. He served out the rest of Harding's term and was himself then reelected in 1924. During this time, the U.S. went from being a debtor nation to the world's leading creditor nation. At the Washington Disarmament Conference of 1922, Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes and Britain, France, Japan, and Italy agreed to reduce their naval forces. Then in 1928, Secretary of State Frank Kellogg and the French foreign minister got together, and he was called Aristide Briand. So hence the Kellogg-Briand Pact got 50 nations to sign a pact to renounce war. So there was this whole interwar period where people were tired of war. They were even, renouncing war. Charles Dawes in 1923 was a private banker who headed up a group of private bankers from the United States. And it was in response to 1923 when Germany stopped its reparation payments. Charles Dawes and the bankers renegotiated the payments and loaned the Germans money, which would just continue the reparation payments, and then we will see what eventually happened. In the election of 1928, Herbert Hoover, the Republican, won against Al Smith, who was the Democratic candidate and the first Catholic to actually run for president. But of course, Al Smith, the Catholic, lost. And so that is the end of this week. Any questions, please feel free to email or phone me.